She was lost, broken, and bleeding deep in the forest, until a quiet man with a forgotten past carried her through the mist. But what he didn't know? She wasn't just a stranger. She was the daughter of the woman who once saved his life. And her return would uncover secrets buried beneath the pines for years. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and give this video a like. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's jump into the story. The pine forest was quiet, wrapped in morning mist that hung low over the mossy ground like a soft blanket. Birds hadn't yet begun to sing, and the air held that early kind of stillness, like the world was holding its breath. Callum moved through the trees with calm, practiced steps. He wasn't a man who needed much. A small cabin, a fire that didn't smoke, and the peace of nature were more than enough. His long coat brushed against the ferns as he walked, and a woven satchel bounced lightly against his side. Inside it, herbs he had gathered before dawn, spruce tips for salve, cedar bark for tea. He was almost to the stream when he stopped. A sound, faint, out of place. It wasn't an animal, not the shuffle of deer or the chatter of squirrels. It was a groan. Human, weak and strained, his eyes narrowed, his body already turning toward it before he had time to think. Callum dropped his satchel and broke into a run. The mist thickened as he climbed the ridge, swallowing roots, rocks, and shadows. But the forest wasn't foreign to him. It had been his home for years. His boots hit the ground with confidence, avoiding the hidden dips and loose stones. Then, he saw her. Half covered in wet leaves and needles, a woman lay still beneath a fallen branch. Her blonde hair was tangled and stuck to her dirt-streaked cheek. One boot was gone, her ankle bent at an unnatural angle. The sleeve of her jacket was torn, blood soaking through the fabric. Her hand twitched as if trying to move, but her eyes didn't open. Callum knelt beside her, gently brushing leaves from her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, quick, but still there. "You're all right," he whispered, mostly to himself. She didn't reply. Near her collarbone, a delicate bracelet, glinted, bent, and snapped. A tiny folded paper peeked from her jacket pocket, too carefully placed to be an accident. Callum didn't touch it. That wasn't his business. Right now, all that mattered was saving her. He pulled off his coat and draped it over her small frame. Then, with careful hands and strength built from years of living in the woods, he lifted her. She was lighter than he expected. Her head fell gently against his shoulder, and he turned back through the fog, the forest silent, except for the soft crunch of his steps. By the time he pushed open the cabin door with his foot, the sky had brightened, just enough to paint the treetops with a pale gold. Inside, the cabin was warm and dim, filled with the scents of cedar wood, beeswax, and smoke. Callum laid her on the cot near the fire and quickly stirred the embers until they flared into comforting heat. He worked quietly, dipping a cloth into warm water and cleaning her wounds. His hands moved with gentle focus. She stirred once as he cleaned her leg, wincing slightly but not waking. He wrapped her swollen wrist with soft cloth soaked in a comfrey and ginger root mixture. When he finished, he placed the broken bracelet gently on the small wooden table beside the cot and added a steaming mug of cedar tea. Finally, he scribbled a note on a scrap of paper and tucked it beneath the mug. "If you wake and I'm not here, follow the smell of cedar tea." He lit the lantern next to the bed, letting its golden glow warm the space, then stepped out, letting the door click quietly behind him. Time passed. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. A bird sang outside. And then, slowly, the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. The ceiling beams above her came into focus. She blinked, taking in the soft light, the cozy scent of wood and herbs, the sound of the wind brushing against the walls. Her eyes fell on the mug. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the note. Her lips moved silently as she read. Then, she looked around the room and finally down at herself. Clean bandages, a thick blanket, warmth. Whoever had helped her hadn't left her behind. She touched her wrist, then her ankle, both aching but secure. Her gaze landed on the table again, this time on the broken bracelet. She picked it up, turned it over slowly, and closed her eyes. A deep breath shook through her chest. Lena didn't know where she was. She didn't remember falling. All she knew was she had been alone in the forest, and now she wasn't. And for the first time in what felt like years, she felt safe. The door creaked gently. Callum stepped in, holding a small bundle of firewood. He met her eyes across the room. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But something passed between them in that silence. Not fear, not questions, just understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. He nodded once, set the wood by the fire, and walked to the table. Pouring water into a small pot, he began to prepare more tea. Still not a word spoken. But Lena's shoulders relaxed just a little. She let her head rest back against the pillow and stared into the fire. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of questions, of pasts not yet shared, of things waiting quietly to be remembered. And outside, the pines stood tall and still, like quiet guardians of a story just beginning. The days that followed passed in quiet rhythm. Lena rarely spoke, but her eyes slowly started to follow Callum's movements. She watched him stoke the fire in the mornings, prepare herbal tea, and leave extra blankets near the chair where she liked to sit. The pain in her ankle and wrist was still there, but duller now, tucked beneath the soft distractions of healing and silence. She still hadn't asked where she was. Callum hadn't asked why she came. It was an unspoken agreement between them. Let the forest speak first. One cloudy afternoon, while Callum was out gathering firewood, Lena stood slowly from the cot, her hand on the wall for balance. She limped toward the window and looked outside. The trees were tall and endless, their green fading into fog. Birds darted between branches. The stillness wasn't scary anymore. It was comforting. Her eyes drifted around the cabin, stopping on a shelf above the fire. A small, framed photograph rested there. She couldn't make out the faces from where she stood, so she inched closer. The frame was old, the glass cracked slightly at the corner. In the photo, a group of people stood outside the very cabin she was in. Men, women, even a few children. Some smiled, some didn't, but all looked tired and grateful. In the back stood a woman with her hair tied in a loose braid, a stethoscope around her neck. She had strong shoulders, a serious face, and eyes that reminded Lena of someone she used to know. Her breath caught. She reached for the photo and turned it over. Faded writing on the back read, Field Clinic 2008, Dr. Mira Fenwood and the community she helped. Mira, that name. Lena stepped back, heart suddenly racing. It had been years since she'd said it aloud. Mira Fenwood was her mother, or had been. Once. Before she left. Before she disappeared into her career and out of Lena's life. When Callum returned, Lena was sitting in the chair by the fire, the photo in her lap. He noticed right away. "You found that," he said simply. Lena looked up, her voice cracked from disuse. "Who was she to you?" Callum sat across from her. He wasn't surprised, his voice was soft. "She saved my sister's life." He looked into the fire. "We were just kids. My sister got sick, real bad. My parents couldn't afford to get her to the city, and then one day this woman shows up. Came with a bag full of medicine, no questions asked. She stayed for a week, treated my sister, showed my mother how to care for her, even taught her how to grow healing plants in the backyard. Then she left, quietly, like she arrived." Lena's eyes didn't leave his face. "That sounds like her." "You knew her?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "She was my mother." A silence settled between them, thicker than the mist outside. "I didn't know she ran this place," Lena said. "I knew she went away a lot. She always said the world needed her. I just didn't know where she went when she disappeared." Callum's brow furrowed. "She never talked about a daughter," She wouldn't have, Lena whispered. We weren't close, I think. She didn't know how to be a mother and a healer, so she chose one. Callum didn't respond right away. He let the words settle. Lena stood slowly and reached for her jacket, pulling a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket. She opened it on the table. It was old, yellowed, and soft from being handled too many times. Coordinates. And one short message written in firm handwriting, for when you're ready to understand. She left this in her journal, Lena said. I found it after she died. The coordinates led me here. I didn't know why I came, until now. Callum stared, at the paper, then at her. She wanted you to see this place, he said. Maybe to understand the part of her that never made it back to you. Lena's voice was small. She could have just told me. He nodded. Some people don't know how to explain who they are. So they leave footprints and hope we follow them. They sat in silence, the fire cracking softly between them. Outside, the fog was lifting. The forest seemed to breathe more easily. Lena looked down at her injured wrist, then back at the photo of her mother surrounded by strangers. The photo she had never seen. The version of her mother she had never met. For the first time in years, she didn't feel angry. She felt curious. Maybe even ready. That night, Lena didn't stay in bed. Instead, she sat by the window, the photo on her lap, the folded note beside it. She watched the moon rise through the trees. She listened to the sound of wind brushing past the cabin walls, and somewhere deep in her heart, something long shut finally began to open. The forest had begun to change, not in a loud or obvious way, but in small, quiet moments. The fog lifted a little sooner in the morning. The birds sang louder near the window. The air felt softer, almost like it knew something important had happened inside the cabin. Lena moved with more strength now. Her ankle still gave her trouble, but with the help of a sturdy walking stick Callum carved for her, she was learning to walk again, one slow step at a time. Each morning, she found a fresh mug of cedar tea waiting for her on the table. Callum never said much, but she could feel the way he noticed things, how he placed the tea exactly where her hand would reach, how he opened the window when the room felt too warm, how he left his old flannel coat draped over the chair she liked best. They rarely talked about the past. Instead, they talked about the forest, what plants could help ease pain, which bark made the best fire starter, when the fish would return to the river. Lena listened closely. Her world before this had been full of loud voices and fast decisions. But here, everything had a rhythm, and she was starting to learn it. One afternoon, Callum led her outside. They walked slowly along a narrow trail until they reached a small clearing where a few wooden benches and garden beds sat, worn but alive. The place looked like it had once been a gathering spot. This used to be the healing garden, Callum said, setting down his tools. Your mother taught people how to grow their own medicine here. Lena knelt beside him, pressing her fingers into the soil. It was rich and cool, dark with life. I never saw her do any of this, she said softly. Callum handed her a small bag of seeds. Then maybe it's time you did. They planted together in silence. Basil, calendula, lavender. Lena's hands were shaky, unused to digging in the dirt, but she didn't stop. She laughed when a worm crawled across her palm, and Callum smiled at the sound. Afterward, they sat on the bench under a large spruce tree. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above them, and for the first time in days, Lena looked at him, not just with thanks, but with something deeper. You never asked why I came here, she said. Callum leaned back, his gaze calm. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. I came because of a map, she said, but I stayed because something about this place makes me feel like I can breathe again. He nodded. That's what healing feels like. That night, they shared a simple meal, root vegetable stew and fresh bread baked in the old cast-iron pan. Lena took a deep breath, letting the warmth settle in her chest. Everything tasted real, earthy, honest. Nothing like the packaged meals and business dinners she had grown used to in her old life. Later, When Callum stepped out to bring in more firewood, Lena noticed something on her nightstand. A small wooden figure, an owl, carefully carved, smooth, to the touch. She picked it up and turned it in her hand. It was beautiful, simple, thoughtful. Callum returned just as she was admiring it. He paused in the doorway. "You carved this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Seemed like something you'd appreciate." "I do," she said, smiling softly. "Thank you." They didn't say much after that, but they didn't need to. The fire crackled, and the air between them was full of unspoken understanding. Over the next week, Lena helped with everything she could. She boiled water for salves, folded bandages, even taught one of the local children how to read the simple labels Callum had written on herb jars. It surprised her, how natural it felt to be useful in this quiet place. She still had questions about her mother, questions she wasn't sure would ever be answered. But in place of frustration, she found something else. Peace. A kind of peace that came from doing something meaningful with her hands, from watching a garden grow, from sitting in silence with someone who saw her without needing her to explain herself. One evening, as the stars appeared above the tree line, Lena and Callum sat by the fire outside the cabin. The night was cool, the flames soft and steady. "You ever miss the city?" Lena asked. Callum shook his head. "I've never been. Don't think I'd like it." She chuckled. "It's loud, bright, fast. Doesn't sound like home." She looked into the fire. "I used to think it was, but now, I'm not so sure." He glanced at her. "Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's just where we finally stop running." Lena didn't reply, but her heart did. Quietly, clearly. It had been exactly 1 year since Lena had left the cabin in the forest. She remembered every detail of that final morning, the crunch of frost under her boots, the warmth of cedar tea still lingering on her tongue, the sound of Callum chopping kindling outside. He hadn't tried to stop her when she walked away. He didn't make promises or ask for any. Instead, he had stood in the doorway, watching her with the kind of eyes that say everything. Without speaking at all, she hadn't turned around, but she had left something behind, her carved owl, quietly placed on his shelf by the window. A silent thank you, a piece of herself. Now she stood once again at the edge of the same clearing. Her boots, though newer, still crunched over fallen pine needles. In her hands she carried only a satchel, no phone, no laptop, just her mother's old journal, a jar of dried herbs, and a small wooden box. The cabin looked almost the same, but not quite. New flower beds lined the front porch, and a hand-painted sign above the door now read, "Fenwood Field Station." Lena smiled. It was perfect. Before she could knock, the door opened. Callum stood there, sleeves rolled up, soil on his hands and the same quiet warmth in his eyes. He blinked, unsure if she was real. "Hi," she said. His shoulders relaxed. "You came back." "I did." No dramatic music, no sweeping declarations. Just that. He stepped aside and she entered. Inside, the cabin had changed too. The shelves were now filled with donated medical supplies and clean bandages. A small group of volunteers gathered at the table, discussing a new water system. 2 local children sat on the floor near the fire, sorting herbs by color. Lena's eyes watered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the wooden counter and placed the box gently on top. Callum joined her. "What's that?" She opened the lid. Inside was a small wooden owl, her original carving, and something new, a carved pine tree, delicate and detailed. In the center was a tiny hollow space holding a folded paper. He picked it up, unfolding the note. It read, "For the one who reminded me where roots are planted and why they matter." Callum looked at her, eyes soft. "You've been busy." She nodded. "Started a foundation for remote care clinics. We named it after my mother, the Fenwood Circle." He smiled, slow and proud. "She would have liked that." "I hope so." That evening, they walked together to the big cedar tree just behind the station. It had grown taller, stronger. A new bench sat beneath it, and the soil around it smelled of fresh growth. Lena sat down first. "I used to think healing was about fixing things," she said. "Now I think it's more about listening and planting what you can." Callum nodded. "You learned well?" They sat in silence, watching the last light slip behind the mountains. Later they joined the volunteers for dinner. Soup simmered on the stove, bread baked in the oven. Children laughed in the corner. An old woman shared stories of the first time she met Lena's mother, how she had arrived on foot during a snowstorm and stayed 3 nights just to help one sick child. Lena listened with her whole heart. After the meal, she returned to the porch. Callum followed, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You could have stayed in the city," he said. She looked up at the stars. "I didn't belong there anymore. I don't know if I ever really did." He handed her the tea. "You belong here." She smiled. "So do you." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a tiny carved heart. Not flashy, not perfect. Just real. He placed it in her hand. "I don't have the right words," he said, "but I've never needed many." She held the heart close. "You say enough." That night they sat side by side on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket. The stars stretched above them. The trees swayed gently in the wind. They didn't need to say what they were. There was no label, no rush. Just 2 people who had found something worth staying for. A few days later, a new shipment of supplies arrived. Lena helped unpack the boxes, laughing with the volunteers and labeling jars with careful handwriting. She was wearing Callum's old flannel shirt again, the one that somehow still smelled like cedar and firewood. Life in the forest wasn't perfect. It was often messy, tiring, demanding, but it was real. And in the quiet moments, when she knelt in the garden or watched Callum carve wood by the fire, Lena felt something stronger than peace. She felt home. At the end of that day, she sat by the fire with her mother's journal open in her lap. She added a final entry in her own words. "I once searched the world for answers. Now I know some answers grow slowly, like roots. And sometimes, the most powerful kind of love doesn't arrive with thunder. It whispers through the trees and waits for you to hear it." She closed the journal, stood up, and walked to Callum's side. No promises, no endings. Just presence. Just love.